Hi everyone. Welcome to the Power Shift Network Convergence 2021. We're so glad you all are here. It's a virtual setting and a bit different from how we usually do things, but we're really excited to have this conversation and on this career panel about with a bunch of different engineers and architects. And so, um, yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. If everyone wants to go ahead and introduce themselves, we can start there. We can start with Will first on the on the agenda.
All right, I've never been first on the agenda. Hello, everyone. I'm Will Martin. I have an architecture firm in Denver, Colorado. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I've been involved in climate change activism since about 2005, when I was a part of a lot of activism that was happening at Middlebury College that sort of preceded some of the 350.org work, and have been trying to sew that experience into a professional career that has meaning and can support myself and my family now, and have a lot of different, not a lot of, some support. I'm still here and they're all still here, but happy to share my experiences and be a part of this great panel. So looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. How about Hannah? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name's Hannah Jallis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a mechanical engineering PhD student at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. So my research is entirely focused on offshore wind turbines. So I'm an engineer, but I also really have a strong passion for wind energy. And kind of how I came about that was I got a bachelor's degree in physics, decided I wanted to transfer into engineering, so that seemed like I could maybe apply it more to fight directly against climate change. So I had a lot of thoughts about that, about different kinds of topics and how I could use it to fight climate change in a way that complemented my skills. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here and just chat with you all about different options.
Awesome. How about Carrie? Tell us about your work.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Carrie Wong. I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I recently got my PhD in material science and engineering from the University of Minnesota. My primary interest was looking at ways to improve the manufacturing of silicon solar cells, growth of semiconductor materials. Right now, I am not in an engineering role. I work at a local nonprofit that focuses on Indigenous youth education. I run and kind of build out a program known as their Green Jobs Pathways program, designed to prepare Native youth for careers in renewable energy and energy efficiency. Outside of my professional life, I organize with Sunrise Movement. I'm part of their core team for or their video network core team. We try to decentralize political filmmaking for young people across the nation.
Yes, and last but not least, Ray, tell us about yourself and your work.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. My name's Ray Vassar. I use she, her pronouns. I am in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm a landscape architect and I work in our PHS's urban design, Pennsylvania Horticultural Society's urban design team. So we work in public landscapes, parks, playgrounds, green stormwater infrastructure, streetscapes, things like that. Prior to going back to school for landscape architecture, I worked in environmental advocacy on leading a coalition of organizations in Philadelphia for a more sustainable Philadelphia. And I think what really got me was a little bit of a Goldilocks and the Three Bears type of thing. I didn't know what landscape architecture was. In college, I got interested in land use, both from an environmental and a social perspective. And I worked for an architect and it felt like the building scale wasn't quite where I was most interested. Then I did this work in environmental advocacy, and we did a lot of work around zoning reform and other urban planning sort of scale work. And one of the campaigns that I worked on was on public riverfront access. And I was able to see, for me, there was a level of immediacy that was greater than in the planning world, still slower often than in the architecture world, but that it felt like I could still make the sort of impact that I was interested in from a community perspective, and that I felt like it would actually happen. And so now, and I can talk about sort of as we go on, like I definitely went into firm life knowing I did not want to stay there, and Will might have the same experience, but in architecture school, there's a lot of sort of pressing you into firm life as the only option. And I knew that wasn't going to be the forever option, but I went that direction for a little and found it, not surprisingly, incredibly unfulfilling, and made my way back to public work. And now one of the interests that I particularly have, and something that we're trying to work on, is thinking about environmental justice as more than preventing people from being poisoned, but also a more equitable distribution of positive assets. So trying to increase biodiversity and urban parks, not only in like the sort of premier wealthy neighborhoods, but throughout cities like Philadelphia. So thanks so much again for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you all. So as the audience can tell, there's a range of experiences and backgrounds and career paths. And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are interested in engineering architecture careers or what you can do with that to help fight the climate crisis. You know, these people are testimony, can tell you about all the different avenues that you can take with those type of backgrounds. So I'm going to actually start again with Will. What are some of the challenges, and maybe other people can touch on this as well. It seems like everyone has some climate justice or environmental justice involved in their work. But what are some of the challenges in pursuing a career in architecture that is in alignment with climate justice values?
Well, I can have the one-word answer is capitalism. the two-word answer is late capitalism. Now, I did want to just I think Ray started to touch on some of the ways in which certain trajectories through educations, or like an educational path that leads you into a profession that might be a sort of licensed profession like architecture and engineering. Both are, they have pretty prescribed paths that and sort of series of expectations that feel and are in many cases quite restrictive. There's a certain amount of inertia that comes with those industries and how they interact with the whole world of material flows and labor flows and all the things that are required to manifest the built environment, which requires a lot of capital. And because of that, there's just a lot of really perverse ways in which capitalism and the treatment of the built environment as a sort of financial asset or property just results in bad outcomes. And it's really hard to be up against that larger sort of societal challenge at every turn. And to that point, I wanted just to touch on what Ray was touching on, I think is a question of scale and where you can sort of insert yourself and find difference. I mean, the work of PowerShift and other organizations and convergences that are working at sort of a global scale and shifting perceptions and actions, that can come down to the individual and individual choices, and but there's also ways in which systems thinking and work within these professions and the skills you develop along the way can have you sort of edge in and find alternative ways of imagining those systems. So I would say the challenge is to enter into a profession that has a lot of sort of problematic relationships and a lot of inertia that is sort of set out in front of you. But the opportunity is to then try and reconfigure and redefine those systems and sort of set that inertia in maybe a different direction. So the challenge is the same as the opportunity. I like to quote Frederick Jameson, who has a quote, which is, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism." And the architecture, the role I can see architects having is to finding an image or an imaginary that is an escape route to what I feel like are some of the truths that are in that statement. So the challenge is capitalism. The opportunity is finding an alternative.
Awesome. Anyone else feel particularly called to answer that question? Just about some of the challenges that you've had in your career with aligning that with environmental justice values?
I guess coming from the engineering perspective, I can also say, like, I agree with a lot of what Will said. I think it's also an issue, like the system level inertia is just the same in engineering fields. I think that one thing that was coming to my mind was how, like Will said, the challenge and the opportunity are the same thing, but at a very personal level. Like, I think a lot of engineers in the traditional sense, traditionally brought up, who are, you know, kind of go through that more prescribed pathway, again, historically, maybe they were more focused on like technical problems and like, okay, how am I going to build a better machine? How am I going to design a better wind turbine or a better solar panel, without really thinking about how the design choices and engineering choices they made would affect communities of different kinds and like marginalized people, because they were just so focused on the technical aspect. I think that is slowly changing. And I think there's a lot of interest from companies and also from governmental agencies that are helping like fund some research. Again, I'm on the academic side right now, and thinking about how to start thinking about the impacts of technical decisions while those technical decisions are being made. But I think that's a really exciting opportunity for someone who cares about these values to bring that in themselves. So say you're working on a team of engineers, you can say like, okay, so that's maybe a good technical solution that solves the technical problem easiest, but what other impacts is that going to have? And just bringing that up from the beginning. So I think that's something that I personally have experience with, being able to say like, hey guys, let's stop and think about this. Who else should we bring to the table here before we just present this as the final solution to a technical problem?
Yeah, definitely. And as someone personally who can deal with sometimes just like, I'm in an interdisciplinary program right now, and it's like just trying to figure out who else needs to be there. And I don't know, really supplementing your conversation with many groups. So just another question. I'll direct this at Ray. Can you tell us about a really defining moment for you in your work? And maybe you also, Carrie, is just throughout the changes that you all have made in your careers and what has led you to those decisions.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, as I mentioned, I knew that firm life was probably not going to work out for me long term, but like Will sort of touched on, the prescribed track, like part of it is around licensure. So part of being licensed as a landscape architect requires you to work under another licensed landscape architect. And then there's a series of exams that you have to take in order to become. So technically, I am not a landscape architect. I am trained as a landscape architect. I am a landscape architectural designer, but I have not finished those exams. I don't know if I'll finish those exams. It feels like a utter waste of time. But it also, in the just trying to be straight with you also about what it all means. Like, I know if I want to raise that's beyond like a every year type of thing, I have to get licensed. So, yeah, there was, so I did the hours under licensed people to be able to get that as an option. And I was working in Los Angeles, and the firm that I worked for did a lot of high-end residential work. So that was about half of my work, which felt pretty questionable to start with. and I was living in downtown LA and biking to work and doing a bike subway split with it. And so I would bike. I don't know if anyone's familiar with downtown LA. There's really concentrated Skid Row, which before I moved to LA, I didn't actually know was a literal place. I thought it was just an expression, is actually a literal place. It's one of the worst houselessness crises in the country. And I would go back and forth between doing estate work for someone who was obsessed with security, where we had spiky plants and then a wall and then more spiky plants and a camera and an electrified fence that was hidden within this, and it just felt insane. And all I could think is, but you still let me in, and you still let all the other help in, the fancy help, like what I think of as architects and landscape architects, that's fancy help. And then there's not fancy help, who often, in this case, lived on the grounds. And I thought, someone who works for you is going to be the one who kills you. And so I guess I would go back and forth between those. And it just felt like such whiplash between like such lavishness and such suffering that seemed completely unnecessary. And I just felt like, no, I can't do this anymore. Like I can't. And for me, like, I come from a family, my father experienced homelessness when I was in college, and it just seemed like it made me feel sick to go to see like that sort of economic disparity happening, and feeling like I was just, it's not like me not designing your yard was going to make you any less grossly rich, but I just felt like it wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my life. And I knew that before. And I think it's maybe important to mention that, because I think a lot of us do things in our careers that we don't feel awesome about. But I think there's just a degree of like, how not awesome are you going to feel? And at one point I was saying to friends, like, listen, I don't make enough money to feel this bad. Like, if I want to feel bad, I'll be a hedge funder and I'll feel bad, but maybe I can pay for something to make me feel better. And I didn't mean that sincerely, because I wasn't going to do that, but it just felt like there's a lot of jobs where you can feel really bad about what you're doing and you're not even being compensated for it. So yeah, I think that was a turning point for me, of just feeling like enough was enough. Like, I don't have to keep putting in more time to wonder when I'm going to make the shift. But it's also, and I'm sorry, I'll wrap up there. It's hard if you're not going out on your own. Like, I think Will has his own firm. It's hard to find jobs that you're not going to feel bad about within this profession because of the constraints of capital. Like, most jobs, you're going to be doing some work that you think is gross in one form or another. So I think a lot of it is being creative and brave. And if I was to make a piece of advice for people who want to go into the field, I would say do your best to pay as little as you can, so you're less constrained by that when you get out.
That is great advice. As someone undergrad, I will take note. Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said. Just, how not awesome do you feel doing the work, and also how long can you last in that environment? I think that's really important. And just, a recent study I just came out and said that that students, the biggest factor in them not joining the environmental field is just due to pay. And I know people making $36,000 doing stuff that they don't like in a summer at an internship, and then average for environmental jobs, and possibly the same in architecture, is just $5,000 possibly. And I think if you want to do morally inclined work and be a morally inclined person in your career, there are definitely sacrifices, and you just have to know how much you can take. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really real. For Carrie, what is something that brings you joy about your job and work? What's something that brings you joy about it? What made you called to become an instructor? And, how do you see your background possibly influencing your work now?
Yeah, I can answer, I guess, this question, and it'll touch on some of the previously mentioned questions as well, because so like the defining point, I would say, in my career, one defining point was in 2018 when there was that IPCC report on having about 12 years of time that we could really clamp down on our emissions before we kind of go into like irreversible, chaotic climate crisis mode, basically. So part of my background as a researcher at the University of Minnesota was like looking at dynamic systems and how they evolve with time. And so I looked at a lot of, like systems where, there are tipping points, right? Where once you go past, you can never come back, or it's very, very difficult to come back. And so I kind of looked at that and I was like, well, okay, so I gotta do something really important with my career in these next 12 years. And, kind of touching on things that Hannah talked about like addressing technical problems, I think, engineering, is one tool, right? One way to do problem solving. And if you go down that route, you're going to get really good at those technical tools, right? And not everything is a technical problem. And I think that's something I've learned throughout my career. I love being a scientist. I love being an engineer. I love the quantitative aspect of this. Love the logic, rationality. Make sure you come with your data and your numbers. And if I hold true to that, when I follow my quantitative and rational kind of mind and heart, I guess, when we look at a lot of drivers of climate change, I ultimately ask myself, is this a technical problem? Is what I'm doing making the most impact for the amount of time and energy I'm spending? And I had kind of a difficult time answering that with engineering. And I can give you some, I can show some receipts, I guess. So my research was in looking at refining manufacturing of silicon solar cells. But when I look at the kind of like cumulative cost of, what does it take to put solar cells on a roof, that manufacturing cost has been going down by itself over time already. And one of the most substantial costs is, installation and roofing, roof installation stuff, arrays, racking, that kind of stuff. So it really made my research feel like, oh, I'm not really even sure if this research is that impactful. And on top of that, we live in a system of, lots of large utility monopolies. In where I am, I'm using Xcel Energy for electricity. And one of these things that these large utilities do is we have a ton of coal plants, or Xcel Energy and other large utilities have a ton of coal plants that they operate at a financial loss, and they pass down those costs, they recoup those costs from ratepayers, right? And when those coal plants are online, they prevent other renewables from being dispatched, like wind and solar, right? So even with the technology that we have, we can't even utilize its full potential, not because things aren't efficient enough, not because we can't get our costs down low enough, but because of non-technical problems, because certain people decided, no, we're going to have everyone subsidize coal, right? There are other, so kind of reckoning with the level of kind of like, corruption essentially in our society that, that the technology can't really solve, right? If I were to develop a better solar cell or a way of manufacturing solar cells, would that meaningfully increase that rate of adoption of renewable energy? These are things that I've asked myself. And if I want to be super rational and logical, and I look at what's holding us back, a lot of it isn't technical. I love, I think being armed with the methods of science and engineering is really powerful. and I would never regret my education. But if we want to be rational, we got to do it all the way. We got to be quantitative, and we got to look at the data all the way. I think it's also easy to feel good about working on some, exotic new technology, but not be really addressing the most critical issues that are, the most pressing and critical that are facing us today. So that's why I kind of like switched out of engineering, and I teach young people now about renewable energy. So there's like nothing that's there's complete 100% joy about that, obviously, because I get to empower these young people to think about energy and where things come from, like our energy comes from, and think about the systems that we live in and what needs to be fixed. So I love my job now.
Can I just add something to that really quick? Yeah, I guess I totally agree with Carrie that it can be easy to, get caught up in the like, okay, we're just going to make better technology, and that's not necessarily the only the dominant roadblock to progress towards climate action. That was something that I thought a lot about when I was deciding my career path as well. And for me, some of the thoughts I had was basically, okay, that is true, but that's also where my skills and joy are. So I can go ahead and recognizing that. So say I want to go into engineering or architecture, you can still find areas within there that do need work. But it might take some more careful thought. And I want to just emphasize, like, for me, maybe it wasn't going and, making infinitesimal improvements to existing wind turbines. For me, I'm like, okay, so one of the big barriers for wind energy adoption in the US is people have land use issues. Okay, so we're going to take them and move them offshore and out of people's backyards, and that might increase the rate of social adoption. So like, that was a concrete example of me being like, okay, increasing the technology isn't going to necessarily increase acceptance and adoption, but you can think about which areas will provide the most bang for your buck in some ways. And just like being cognizant of that and like talking to people and doing research, like not technical research, but just like, Googling and like trying to figure out what the map is for that, I think can be really useful in terms of figuring that out.
Yeah, I really like all that you all had to say. Carrie, you have something else to add?
Oh yeah, I think we talked a lot about like making decisions on what you may tolerate in your career, and I think something I would add is I think a lot of you, if you're in this forum and in this conference these past few days, that's great that you're being kind of tuned into activism and doing things outside of probably school if you're a student. I think there's always going to be stuff that when we think about what we really need to do to confront climate change, I think there's always going to be stuff that we have to do outside of work, outside of what capitalism will allow us to do, right? The system isn't going to pay you to deconstruct the system, right? So what I think, whatever careers that you guys ultimately choose, I think keep in mind that what you're doing here now, connecting with people in your community, and doing just your outside of work activism is always going to be needed in this movement.
And like having the engineering and architecture background and skills to then communicate with people to help with some of these social roadblocks, I think is so important. Like, yeah, for me, my career is like, okay, so I have like my technical career, but then I use that knowledge and that expertise to do other kinds of work that are also moving forward the climate activism agenda.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And just the fact that obviously the climate crisis is an emergency, as you were kind of speaking to, Carrie, it's like there's research to do at a very basic level, at a non-applied level that's extremely essential. It's given us things like the internet and AI and was allowing people to get vaccinated and whatnot. But at the same time, there's so much more work to do at scale since it's happening now and it needs to be solved now. So yeah. If anyone has any questions, by the way, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I know there's some commentary going on down there that we'll get to, but yeah.
Can we also have our guests put, what they're studying or what they're interested in studying in the chat, just so we can kind of get an idea of where people are?
Yeah, definitely, that's a great idea. Yeah, and so I'll pose this to everybody. What do you wish you had known about being in your field earlier? And if there's any additional advice that you would share with people.
I can jump in. I mean, I did want to address a couple of things, and also admit that you guys probably didn't catch it earlier, but I didn't call myself an architect because, like Ray, I'm unlicensed, which brings up a question, and I think an important role of like solidarity building with the labor movement. And I'm involved a lot with the Architecture Lobby, which is an organization which is looking, that does labor organizing within the field of architecture. And there is a real challenge as sort of come up in a sort of conflict between having a quote unquote career, which usually is, you assume that there might be some sort of compensation or being able to maintain make a living there. And this question of joy. And I do think that they can be in conflict, as sort of Ray was mentioning, and Carrie and Hannah were also just the joy potentially that comes with identifying and being participating in the things that are actually making a difference, and identifying them, and being able to then jump in and also make a living doing that. It's something that, as I sort of alluded to, is ongoing and a sort of perpetual challenge. I don't really think about my experience to date with the world of work as we define it, sort of from a labor perspective, as being a career. It's certainly been, there's obviously a path there, but Alexander, we were briefly mentioning, sort of my maybe meandering path, which I might have been on one that was sort of comparable to yours now. And you sort of suggested that it's nice to know that there's, different places you might end up. And I really don't know where I am or where I'm going. I think, to supplement the creation of our business that gave us some autonomy, with the, similar to Ray, had put time in at a corporate firm, put that time in to pay down my student loans, and then had the privilege to try and start a business. It didn't work out. We also started our family at the same time, somewhat unplanned, and that was a whole other thing of bringing joy into our lives, which is managing that as well. And I ended up sort of supplementing the creation of our firm and the creation of our family by going back to work and doing GIS work for basically looking at affirmatively furthering fair housing, which, if any of you guys followed the late Trump presidency, that work is sort of went away. So I was recently laid off, and then now and collecting unemployment, like many of us are, and are trying to really now kick up the work to employ both myself and my wife in our firm. So the struggle never ends, and it's the path doesn't have to be linear, but I do think holding true to these things that give you joy and bring meaning, and hopefully a lot of that meaning might be tied to change, important societal change that we all know needs to happen, is the work. The capital P project, which is the ticket to the show, as I like to put it. Like we have our time here, and you certainly want to leave it better than we came in. So it's you're already doing it, and it's great that you guys are all here. So you just keep it up and keep on your toes, and whether you go from engineering into filmmaking. Carrie, it was great to hear, like moving maybe from more technical space to maybe a more space of working on narrative work is really exciting. And I think I would recommend not pursuing a career, but having a certain set of values that you sort of navigate the world with. And I think I certainly am excited to see everyone here and sort of know that and have confidence in the fact that you're already doing that. So a long meandering answer, like my non-career.
Yeah, I really like that. Just moving with a set of values. I find that it's a good takeaway. Yeah, anyone else?
Just one thing on you'd asked if there was anything that maybe we wished we had learned a little bit more about. So I definitely came to landscape architecture from a people-centric perspective and a land use around people and thinking about public space and making that space more welcoming. And I had been working in the environmental field, so it's I had been thinking about things like sprawl and everything around climate change, but I didn't know much about plants at all. And I think sometimes that's surprising to people who don't work with landscape architects, but Will's worked with us. You probably know that many of us don't know anything about plants. And I think in retrospect, I mean, I've taken the time on my own to become a little more educated in that regard. And having switched from, I went to school in Virginia, then out to LA, and now I'm in Pennsylvania. There's always a little bit of relearning in different climates, but I think when you think about the climate, or when I think about the climate crisis, there's the urgency of trying to, in this brief period, we have to deal with the most catastrophic version of it. There's policy, there's technical solutions, but I think if we're honest, there's also going to be a lot of mitigation, because we're not going to prevent, maybe we'll prevent the worst case scenario, but there's also real problems that are going to exist with flooding and extreme heat and all sorts. So for me, I wish I knew, and I'm trying to learn my plants a little bit better to think about because I think plants are a very low tech solution that has, it not only is mitigating of the physical discomfort that will be experienced as a result of climate change, and that is already being experienced as a result of climate change, but is also helping to reduce the worst impact. Like when you look at trees, for example. So yeah, I think that's something that if folks, and I'm going to make a brief plug also in here. I talked to my boss earlier today about there's a honorarium that comes with this. And I'm going to be donating mine to use as a scholarship for anyone who's interested in going to our Woody Plants Conference. I'm going to put the link in here, and I'll also put my email. So anyone who maybe doesn't know that much about plants or already does and wants to know more, I'm just going to, that's the link. And then this is my email. It's virtual, so it's safe, and anyone can go to it who's in. So anyone who's interested in it, just send me a paragraph maybe about why you're interested. We'd particularly encourage BIPOC folks and queer folks to apply, but anyone who's interested, please let me know. I can only speak I can probably cover one person with the honorarium, but I can see what I can do to see if maybe I can cover more or get someone else to, make it happen. And I went before the COVID crisis happened, and I found it really informative, but I also think it's super accessible. And so yeah, if you want to nerd out on some plants and see if that's something that speaks to you, let me know.
If anyone else had anything to add, please do. We can get into questions if not, though.
I just had one thing, I guess, in terms of general advice, and I guess this is also addressing some of what's being said in the chat about the lack of climate justice in engineering classes in particular, and also architecture, like kind of coursework. And I think that my piece of advice is don't be afraid to take your passion for climate justice and put that in your professional life. And what I mean by that is it can be really beneficial actually to have that kind of be your guiding star. Like for me, I was a physics major in undergrad, but I decided to also get an environmental studies minor. And those classes where you were getting the climate justice information, the climate change coursework, like understanding that made me such a better engineer, and not just like holistically, but like people were excited to have my application for grad school. People were excited in job interviews to hear that I had that background and that ongoing passion. So I think sometimes people get scared and say like, oh, it's not like a traditional engineering path. And so like I should try to like hide that or downplay it or like not bring it to the front. And I think that people are realizing more and more that having a passion for your work and having like a driving reason why you want to work on a topic is really beneficial, and they value that extra guidance. So I agree that it would be, in an ideal world, those courses would be required of everyone. I would encourage you, if you have the ability to take those classes like on the side or as a minor, you can still get benefits from that, even if it's not on your like official diploma, if that name isn't on at the degree on your diploma.
I want to second that. I think having TA'd a lot of undergraduate classes, I can see just the, and also having gone through an engineering undergraduate experience myself, there's just, you're going to get enough engineering. Don't worry, you're going to get enough. So when you have the opportunity to like go out and learn the things that you think are going to be important to really address, the climate, the climate crisis, right? And that could be policy, that could be economics, that could be social studies, cultural things. You're going to have enough technical education, so don't spend your electives on, kind of going deeper into that. Try to, make sure you can get get a broad, well-rounded education as much as you can. And also, like, I think, I really resonated with Will when he was like, I'm not sure where my career is going either, right? And so keep your eyes open, like be on the lookout for things that you can learn and teach yourself. Like if there was a manual that we could have that was like how to solve climate change, obviously we would all follow it to the T. And then we would have solved climate change, because it would have been like, oh yeah, we just need to follow these steps, right? Unfortunately, there is no such manual. So we're going to have to learn and discover things as we go. And I think always keep your eyes open for opportunities. One example for me is, going into filmmaking, where I kind of like understood the need for kind of mass digital storytelling on very important issues that make the climate issue and political issues resonate with people. That was something I felt like I could never, push on from the technical side as an engineer, right? And then even, I've also spent time outside of, my professional life, sharpening other technical skills. You can also teach yourself technical skills. One thing that I'm trying to like dive into now is some software development stuff, some data science stuff. Data science shouldn't just be for finding the most optimal places to drill for more oil or getting kids slightly more addicted to their phones so we can serve them more ads, right? All of these, the methods of science and engineering, the technology, those are agnostic, and we get to decide where we want to use those tools. So always be on the lookout for opportunities to learn from others, to teach yourself things. Keep your eyes open.
Yeah, definitely. We can get into some questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Yeah, let's start. I know Hannah already started to address just this one about, the lack of classes that are interdisciplinary in an engineering degree, and in getting that. But Sarah's interested in knowing about advice anyone has for someone who's interested in urban design, who doesn't have a technical engineering or architecture background, but has a background in environmental science. Maybe Will's a good person to answer this one. I don't know, anyone who wants to or feels like called to answer that, please.
I mean, one thing I can say is, so if your background isn't in urban design, or I'm sorry, I don't know what the other, so sorry, let me just read it. Interested in urban design, doesn't have a technical engineering or architectural background. I mean, policy matters. So I think that's a really good, if you're not technically in a position where you're going to be doing physical design, I think that there's a lot of more planning type jobs. There are jobs that are technically only, that'll be restricted only to people with an urban planning background, but there's all sorts of jobs that are essentially in an urban policy realm that you don't really need any technical background. Like the job that I did before, I had the most liberal arts degree. Like I studied the visual culture of empire. I was looking at like coinage and statuary. That was not highly marketable, especially like in the midst of a recession. So, but I was doing a lot of volunteering work in my community. And through that, I was able to, you know, I knew someone who knew someone, and I put on a bunch of events. And so and they knew that I had interest in, you know, that I was passionate about the environment. And so they heard a position was becoming available at an environmental advocacy organization that was doing work on urban sustainability, and they suggested I apply. And, you know, I hounded them. I will also say, if you're going into a position that you're maybe not an obvious fit for, I highly recommend being persistent. I think folks don't want to, they want someone who really wants the job. So if you have maybe an unorthodox background for it, but you can make, like what Carrie was saying about storytelling, you're always telling your own story too. You're creating your own narrative. So I think that if you see opportunities that don't explicitly say that they're restricted to a certain thing, and even honestly, if they say like public policy degree required, they might not really mean it. If they say like you need to be a registered architect, you probably shouldn't bother applying for the job, because you're not going to get that job. I'm also not going to get that job. Will may not get it either, since he's not licensed. So, but I think policy is a great place, like advocacy work is a great place where you can be involved in an urban design capacity, even if you are not an urban designer. So yeah, I think that would be my, my recommendation on that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to answer that one? If not, we have a question from Dean who wants to introduce himself. Or Will, you had an answer to that one?
Yeah, no, I could just chime in a little bit. I think, you know, looking at it, everyone's interdisciplinary interests and pursuits and backgrounds, studies, all of these are so interconnected, in the silos in which, you know, academics has put many of these, you know, these disciplines is very, to a certain degree, abstract. I mean, obviously, the hard sciences, there's certain skills that are essential, and as Carrie was mentioning, many of those now are increasingly skills you can develop via online courses, or you know, from coding. I taught myself coding in the last 2 years, so I had this position where I was doing a lot of GIS work, and I just learned R and was really able to sort of skill up by investing, I think, like $50. So I would really advise using the breadth of you know, resources that are online, and just being ferocious about taking that on. I think the more interdisciplinary your approach, the more, and I think Hannah was touching on this too, I think the more value you can bring into any conversation. So I've always leaned into the interdisciplinary nature of my background. And going back to the notion of storytelling, if like, as Carrie was mentioning as well, like if, I mean, you can own your narrative, and I think the more more interdisciplinary background that you can sort of share, the better. And if someone appreciates that, that's the place you want to be, because people who are in those silos and are stuck in those places are not going to be the places where real innovation or movement will be happening, given the systems challenges that we're facing. So whether you're looking to get into urban design, I mean, urban design is like, massively expansive in the realms that it touches. If you're looking for some more specificity, I think you could go into any sort of graduate program and look at their sub-disciplines, whether it's transportation planning or land planning or policy, as Ray was mentioning. And there's within those, there's 50 other ways in which you can imagine, like keeping your, all the other interests that you've collected along the way, and reaching out and finding those neural connections that we need to be developing. So, like we're doing here.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Dean has a question and wanted to introduce himself, so I'll let you go ahead.
Oh, hey, nice to meet you guys. I'm just really glad you guys brought all this stuff up, because honestly, I expected today that it was just going to be about engineering, but you guys covered a lot of area. So I just want to get into I really like engineering and game design, but I think the reason I like game design is when I was little, I was one of those kids who wasn't the one who always was having fun. I was just the one who really liked seeing how things work. Like, I'd be the one looking at how an escalator works. I'm like, how the heck does this thing work? Like, just that type of engineering flashbacks, as a child. So, well, my question to you is, what would you recommend for somebody who's a polymath, or somebody who really has all these interests and doesn't know what to do in college and how to function in that?
I am happy to start because that was me. When I started college, I also liked figuring out how things worked, but I was definitely not sure I wanted to do physics or engineering even. I was like, those are interesting. I like that. I have enjoyed the high school physics classes I've taken, but like maybe haven't enjoyed all the high school math classes I've taken. I don't know. I also really like German. I also really like archaeology. I thought about architecture for a while. So like,
So me.
Yeah, I just had no idea. And I knew that I wanted to do something to make the world a better place. And I eventually ended up being like, okay, I'm going to focus on climate change for that. But my advice for that is there are programs and colleges that don't make you choose a major in your first year. And that was really important for me, that you could go to college, take some more college level classes, maybe take some specific classes. Like I did take an architecture class. I did take an archaeology class to be like, I want to learn some more about this just in specificity that I couldn't get in high school.
Oh yeah, and Hannah, sorry to just interrupt, but it's that I'm actually putting a lot of dedication on the side to go learn online courses, so I'm
Nice.
very driven with that. But what I'm looking for is, I think when I go to college, I want to do something like engineering or
Okay.
something very technical, and anything less technical, like maybe like anthropology, and that's another interest I have. I could teach it to myself. I mean, there's Wikipedia, Britannica. I could read up on the history. I mean,
yeah, I see what you mean. So it's awesome that you've already taken the courses online and like kind of gotten that expertise and narrowed in already. I think that there is value depending on what you want to do long term. Like we've been talking about, a lot of technical jobs require the technical degree and then additional licenses afterwards in some cases. So I guess what you could do is also just see if you can look up like what do people do with these degrees, or if you're seeing jobs that you're interested in, like what are the minimum requirements that they're requesting, and that could maybe help guide you. I don't know if that's a great answer here. It's a lot of do more research, but.
Well, actually, this isn't just do more research. I also got the the actual method in doing that, just seeing what people do with the technical degrees. So, but yeah, like you said, do more research.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thank you so much. And as someone who's in college right now, not that much older than you, you said you were 16 in the chat. You have a lot of time. It's really great that you're already thinking about these things. So yeah, Carrie or anyone else wanted to chime in? I saw you all unmute yourselves.
You also asked earlier about being bad at math or something, right? In the chat.
Oh yeah.
You? Okay.
Yeah, that's me.
I can also speak on that. I wasn't great at math, growing up. And so you can do two things, or multiple things, I guess. There are roles that will require less math, even as engineers, depending on which fields and what specialties that you go in. So if you don't want to do math, I think there are pathways there. If you feel like you're bad at math, but you still want to do something that requires math, I think you can do it too. Like I said, wasn't ever great at math, growing up. A lot of my friends were all in like accelerated math classes, and I never was. And then after I finished undergrad, trying to figure out what I wanted to do for grad school research, I was like, this is the last time I'm going to be able to try something new, like for school. And I'm going to try something that I always had anxiety around, which is math. And so I went into a computational field, theoretical simulations. It's math like all the time for the 7 years that I did my PhD, and I made it out. So you can do it too. If you want to lean into it, you could. If you wanted to, you could also find a pathway that uses less math. So I wouldn't let that stop you wherever, I wouldn't let that stop you from pursuing engineering.
Yeah, and thank you. I like to hear that. And just another thing to point out. I mean, I'm interested in engineering, but also like the sciences. And like with that, I'm specifically interested in the research part because I told you like I like looking at how things work, and I think that's part of being a researcher. You're experimenting. You're not just posting papers, but you're collaborating with others. I guess you probably collaborate with others, and the reason I think I said game design as well is, I mean, in the recent years, game design has some physics in it. So I was thinking of making an escalator if I become a game designer. Escalators, elevators, all those cool things, and just not feel confined to have to be in that specific engineering role to do it. Instead, become a game designer so I can create these systems.
Yeah, definitely. I think to some of the earlier points made by the panelists is just, that as people develop their environmental programs at these universities, they'll become more interdisciplinary, and you'll have more opportunities to hopefully, as they develop them and build them up, span out into all of your interests and things like that. But it is 8, so thank you so much to the panelists and everyone who's in attendance. I will drop the link to the sketch. You'll see that there are some other career panels happening right now, including for academics and public scholars, kind of on topic, government policy making, as some people mentioned, artists, designers, physical and mental health professionals. So I'll drop the sketch in there, and there's an opportunity happening right now still, and there's a Zoom link for that.
Oh, and Mrs. Grayson, and Carrie Wong and Hannah Jolis and Will Martin, could you guys all post your like emails possibly? I mean, I really want to network with you guys. I think it'd be good to get your support, and just for everybody else as well,
Good point.
Thank you so much for facilitating, Alexandra. I really appreciate it. And it was nice meeting all of you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Let's just get the emails. Yeah.
Nice
Thank you
to
guys
meet
so
all.
much.
Feel free to email me with questions if you're still.
Right. For everyone.
Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Alexandra. Good to meet everyone.
I appreciate your help, you guys.
Good
Good
luck.
luck in your careers.